The moment usually comes in a small, humiliating silence. You are standing in the kitchen, or sitting on the edge of the bed, or staring at a message you have already deleted twice, and the feeling arrives before the thought does. A tightness in the chest, a strange heat behind the eyes, that familiar question rising from somewhere deeper than logic. Why do I feel guilty for needing more? Not wanting too much, not asking for too much, just more. More honesty, more consistency, more effort, more tenderness, more than scraps, more than almosts, more than being kept close enough to be useful and far enough to be safe from real commitment. And the guilt does not come alone. It brings shame with it. It tells you that if you were calmer, easier, less intense, less sensitive, less demanding, less complicated, then you would not have this ache in your body. It whispers that your needs are the problem, that your longing is excessive, that your standards are too high, that your heart is somehow asking for something embarrassing. But that is only the surface, because the guilt is rarely about the need itself. More often, the guilt is about what your need threatens to expose. It exposes the life you have been living inside a role where you are the understanding one, the flexible one, the woman who does not ask for much, the one who can handle it, the one who makes things easy, the one who keeps the peace, the one who smiles when something hurts, the one who says, "It's fine," when it is not fine at all. And if you have lived there long enough, your nervous system starts to confuse self-erasure with goodness. That is where Carl Jung becomes important, because Jung understood something many people still miss. The persona can become so polished that it begins to feel like your real self. The persona is the face you wear for the world, the version of you built to be accepted, praised, needed, or not abandoned. And when that persona is built around being low maintenance, around being easy to love, around being a good girl or a good woman, then the moment you need something real can feel like a moral failure. You do not just think, "I need more." You feel, "I am being difficult." You do not just say, "I want more care." You feel, "I am asking too much." That feeling is not proof that your needs are wrong. It is often proof that your persona has become too expensive to maintain. Think about how this starts in ordinary life. A child learns that certain needs create tension. Maybe emotional needs were met with impatience. Maybe asking for reassurance was met with sighs, annoyance, silence, mockery, or withdrawal. Maybe you were loved, but only when you were manageable. Maybe you were praised for being mature too early, for not causing trouble, for being the one who understood everyone else. Maybe you became the person who could read the room before anyone else, who could soften the atmosphere, who could absorb discomfort without naming it. That child does not disappear. She grows up, and she becomes a woman who can feel the difference between being loved and being tolerated, but still doubts herself the moment she wants more than tolerance. That is the hidden wound. Not greed, not selfishness, not emotional immaturity, a wound around permission. Permission to need, permission to want, permission to take up space in someone else's attention without apologizing for existing there. And when that permission was never stable, your adult self may still experience desire as danger. This is why some women feel guilty for needing more, even when they are in perfectly ordinary relationships. A text that never comes, a promise that keeps sliding, a partner who gives just enough to keep the connection alive, but not enough to make you feel secure. A friend who leans on you endlessly, but disappears when you need support. A family system where your role is to be the strong one, the helpful one, the one who doesn't make it about herself. The body notices the imbalance long before the mind admits it. You may find yourself checking your phone without meaning to, rehearsing a conversation in the shower, feeling exhausted after a simple interaction, smiling while your stomach is knotted, telling yourself you are overthinking while your body is quietly screaming that something is off. And then comes the guilt, because the deeper truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes guilt appears the moment you begin to outgrow a pattern. As long as you were giving more than you received, the system felt familiar. Familiar does not mean healthy. Familiar means known. And the unconscious loves what is known, even when what is known hurts. Jung would say that the unconscious does not only hide memories, it also preserves patterns. Repetition is one of its favorite languages. If you grew up around emotional unpredictability, You may be drawn toward relationships that recreate the same tension. Not because you want pain, but because part of you is still trying to solve an old problem with a new face. That is why you can feel strangely guilty when you begin to ask for more. The guilt is not just about the present moment. It is connected to an older complex, an old emotional knot that says, if I need too much, I will lose love. A complex is not just a thought. It is a charged inner pattern. It has emotion, memory, body sensation, and expectation all tied together. When it gets activated, you do not simply remember the past. You feel as if the past is happening again. So when someone withholds care, your system may not only register disappointment, it may register threat. And if you learned early that love had to be earned through self-control, then your own need can feel like a betrayal of the role that once kept you safe. That is why so many women apologize for basic emotional needs. Sorry for being sensitive. Sorry for asking. Sorry for wanting clarity. Sorry for needing consistency. Sorry for expecting effort. Sorry for not being okay with half love. Listen to how much self-abandonment is hidden in those apologies. There is a difference between being flexible and disappearing. There is a difference between patience and self-silencing. There is a difference between compassion and becoming available to people who only meet you halfway when it suits them. But if your persona has been built around being easy, then the first time you say, I need more, it can feel like you are becoming someone else. Too much, too loud, too emotional, too demanding. You are not becoming too much. You are becoming visible to yourself. And that visibility can be frightening, because once you can see your need clearly, you can no longer pretend that crumbs are a meal. This is where projection enters the picture. Projection is one of Jung's most useful ideas, and it matters here because we often project not just love, but permission. We imagine that another person will finally authorize what our own inner world has been denying. We wait for someone else to make our need feel legitimate. If he wants more of me, then maybe I am enough. If she chooses me, then maybe I am allowed to want. If they stay, then maybe my longing is not shameful. But projection always creates a dangerous illusion. It makes the other person the gatekeeper of your value. That is how guilt becomes relational. You do not just feel guilty for needing more. You feel guilty because needing more might disturb the bond, and the bond has become the place where your worth seems to live. So you stay small. You over-explain. You over-function. You over-give. You become convenient. And the more convenient you become, the less anyone has to meet you. That is one of the cruelest patterns in human relationships. When someone is always available, their availability stops being noticed. When someone absorbs discomfort without protest, their pain becomes invisible. When someone keeps adjusting themselves to preserve connection, the relationship can begin to orbit around their adaptation instead of their truth. And then the body starts to revolt. Fatigue, irritability, numbness, sudden tears, the urge to withdraw, the feeling that you cannot carry one more conversation that pretends everything is fine. This is not weakness, it is psyche speaking through the body. Jung believed the psyche strives toward balance. When one part of life is overdeveloped, another part begins to push back. If you have spent years being the one who needs less, the part of you that needs more will not stay silent forever. It will emerge as restlessness, resentment, sadness, or a quiet, aching sense that something essential is missing. And often, what is missing is not just attention from others, it is attention from yourself. Because many women are not only guilty for needing more from others, they are guilty for needing more from life. More meaning, more depth, more rest, more truth, more space, more respect. More than a life built around being useful. That guilt can be especially strong if you have been praised for endurance. People may admire how much you can carry, how much you can tolerate, how little you complain. But admiration is not the same as nourishment. And being valued for your endurance can quietly train you to believe that suffering is part of your identity. You may even begin to fear that if you stop overgiving, you will become cold. This is another trick of the old persona. It tells you that boundaries are cruelty, that clarity is selfishness, that needing reciprocity is immaturity, that asking for emotional presence is too much. But boundaries are not the opposite of love. They are what make love real. Without boundaries, you do not know where you end and the other person begins. Without boundaries, compassion becomes self-sacrifice. Without boundaries, empathy becomes a leak. Without boundaries, your kindness becomes a place where other people can keep taking while you keep calling it care. The guilt you feel when you begin to draw a line is often the guilt of a system losing control. Not their control, yours. The old system in you, the one built around pleasing, smoothing, waiting, tolerating, begins to panic when you stop feeding it. It says, if you ask for more, you will be alone. It says, if you disappoint them, you will lose love. It says, if you stop being the easy woman, you will be rejected. And maybe that fear has real history behind it. Maybe you have been rejected before. Maybe you have been punished for having needs. Maybe you were made to feel dramatic when you were honest. Maybe your tenderness was met with indifference. Maybe every time you asked for more, someone made you feel ashamed for asking. If that is true, then your guilt is not random. It is conditioned. But conditioning is not destiny. This is where individuation begins, in the simplest possible place, the moment you stop confusing self-erasure with virtue. Individuation, in Jungian language, is the process of becoming more fully yourself. Not a perfect self, not a socially approved self, a more whole self. A self that can hold desire, disappointment, grief, strength, tenderness, and boundaries without collapsing into shame. A self that no longer needs to split itself in two just to keep being accepted. And that process often begins with a very quiet rebellion. You stop saying yes immediately. You pause before answering. You notice the body before the apology. You let a request sit unanswered for a moment. You admit, at least to yourself, that you need more than what is being offered. That admission can feel devastating at first, because it strips away the fantasy that you were asking for too much. More often, it reveals that you were asking the wrong person, or asking in the wrong system, or asking from a place that was already half defeated. There is a difference between wanting more because you are empty, and wanting more because you are alive. One comes from hunger without direction, the other comes from dignity, and dignity is what guilt tries to steal. It tells you that to want more is to be ungrateful. But gratitude and self-abandonment are not the same thing. You can appreciate what is real and still refuse what is insufficient. You can be kind and still be clear. You can love someone and still know that love without reciprocity is not enough to build a life on. This is the point where many people try to force themselves into gratitude as a way to silence their deeper needs. They say, I should be happy. I should not complain. At least they are not cruel. At least they are here. At least it is something. But at least is where many lives quietly shrink. At least is not the same as enough, and the psyche knows the difference, even when the mouth does not. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself in the comments. My need is not a flaw. Or write your own version. Let it be simple. Let it be true. Because once a sentence can be spoken, it stops living only as shame. There is another layer here, and it matters. Sometimes, the guilt for needing more is not only about fear of losing someone, it is also about the shadow. Jung used the word shadow for the parts of ourselves we do not want to see, do not want to admit, or have learned to reject. If you have always identified as the understanding one, the kind one, the low-maintenance one, then your shadow may contain anger, neediness, selfishness, disappointment, envy, and the desire to be chosen without having to prove yourself. That can sound ugly if you have been taught that good women do not have those feelings. But the shadow is not evil. It is simply disowned life. And when you disown your own need, it does not disappear. It leaks out sideways. It becomes resentment. It becomes passive aggression. It becomes emotional exhaustion. It becomes the sudden urge to disappear without explanation. It becomes tears that arrive too late. It becomes a strange bitterness toward the very people you keep trying to please. That is why guilt can be so confusing. You think you are guilty because you want too much. But often the guilt is covering a deeper truth. You are angry that you have had to want less. That anger is not a moral failure. It is information. It tells you that something in you knows the cost of over-adaptation. The cost is not only emotional, it is existential. Because if you spend too long needing less than you actually need, you begin to shrink your own standards for reality. You start believing that love must be partial, that care must be rationed, that your heart should not expect to be met. that your body should learn to live with tension, that your soul should be grateful for almost. And slowly, without noticing, you become a person who can survive very little, but no longer feel very much. That is not strength. That is survival mode. Survival mode is brilliant at getting you through. It is terrible at letting you live. And many women who feel guilty for needing more are not actually asking for luxury. They are asking to exit survival mode, to stop bracing, to stop translating chaos into normal, to stop calling deprivation being strong. The moment you begin to ask for more, your system may react as if danger is near. That is because the unconscious does not distinguish perfectly between emotional risk and old emotional danger. It remembers the atmosphere, not just the facts. So when you say, "I need consistency," your body may hear, "I might be rejected." When you say, "I need honesty," your body may hear, "I might be left." When you say, "I need more than this," your body may hear, "I am about to lose love." That is why healing this pattern is not just about changing your thoughts. It is about teaching your body that need is not shameful and boundaries are not abandonment. This takes time. It takes repetition. It takes moments of discomfort that you do not immediately betray. It takes learning to stay with the feeling of wanting more without rushing to apologize for it. And yes, sometimes it takes grief, because grief is what comes when you finally stop pretending that less was enough. You may grieve the years you spent shrinking. You may grieve the relationships where you were only valued for what you gave. You may grieve the version of yourself that thought being easy would make love stay. You may grieve the way you kept negotiating with your own heart. Let the grief be there. Grief is not regression, it is recognition. And in that recognition, something in you begins to straighten. Not dramatically, not like a movie, more like a plant turning toward light after too long in a corner. This is the deeper transformation. You stop asking, "How do I become less needy so I can be loved?" And you begin asking, "Why did I learn to feel ashamed of my humanity?" That question changes everything. Because a human being needs connection. A human being needs care. A human being needs to feel remembered, considered, and met. A human being needs more than crumbs and calls it love only when they are starving. Jung would never ask you to worship your need, but he would ask you to listen to what it is trying to tell you. Need can become a compass when it is no longer treated as a defect. It points toward what has been missing, what has been denied, what has been overcompensated for, what has been hidden behind the persona. And sometimes it points toward the simple fact that the life you built around being easy is no longer large enough for who you are becoming. That is a painful realization. It means some people will not understand your new standards. It means some people will call you different, cold, picky, intense, or hard to please. It means some people benefited from the old version of you more than they loved the real one. But if your needs only fit in relationships where you disappear, then the relationship is not a home. It is a performance space, and you are allowed to leave the stage. You are allowed to stop auditioning for care. You are allowed to stop making yourself smaller to protect someone else's comfort. You are allowed to want more, because your heart is more than a survival strategy. There is a quiet power in that. Not the power to control how others respond. Not the power to force anyone to change. The power to tell the truth without collapsing into shame. The power to say, "This is not enough for me." The power to say, "I need reciprocity." The power to say, "I am no longer available for relationships that require me to betray myself." The power to say, "My need is not an inconvenience, it is a signal." And once you say that, even privately, the inner atmosphere changes. The guilt does not always disappear immediately. Sometimes it lingers like an old smell in a room that has been opened to air. But it loses authority. It becomes a feeling instead of a verdict. That is a major shift. Because the guilt used to tell you who you were. Now it only tells you where you were trained. And training can be unlearned. A woman who no longer apologizes for needing more does not become harsh. She becomes clear. She becomes less available to confusion, less available to half-effort, less available to relationships that survive on her silence. She stops confusing endurance with love and starts noticing where love actually lives, in attention, in consistency, in mutuality, in presence. This does not mean every relationship has to be perfect. It means your inner world no longer has to be sacrificed to keep imperfect relationships alive. That is a different life, a quieter life in some ways, a more honest one. A life where the phone can stay silent without your worth disappearing. A life where the mirror does not accuse you for wanting tenderness. A life where the empty chair in the room no longer represents your value. A life where you can sit with your own need and not treat it like a crime. And if someone cannot meet you there, that is information too. Not about your worth, about the limits of the connection. The old wound will still try to persuade you otherwise. It will say, if you were better, they would give more. But that is the voice of the complex, not the truth. It is the old script speaking in the language of self-blame. You do not need to obey it. You only need to notice it. Notice how often guilt appears when you are closest to honesty. Notice how quickly shame rises when you stop over-explaining. Notice how your body feels when you imagine asking for exactly what you need without making yourself smaller first. That sensation matters, because somewhere beneath the guilt is your own inner authority waiting to be reclaimed. Not a loud authority, not a punishing one, a steady one. The kind that says, I can want more without being ashamed. The kind that says, I can ask clearly. The kind that says, I can leave what keeps teaching me to abandon myself. The kind that says, I am not difficult because I need care. I am alive. And that is the sentence that changes the room. I am alive. Not manageable, not convenient, not easy to consume. Alive. When a woman begins to live from that place, her relationships start to tell the truth more quickly. Some people step closer, some step away. Some reveal that they were only comfortable when she was quiet. Some cannot follow her into honesty, some can. But either way, she is no longer negotiating her right to exist. That is the return to self. Not perfection, not certainty, not a guarantee that every need will be met exactly as she hopes. Just the end of the inner lie that says her need is shameful. So the next time the guilt rises, do not rush to obey it. Sit with it for a moment. Put a hand on your chest if you need to. Breathe until the panic softens enough for the truth to be heard. You are not wrong for needing more. You are not selfish for wanting reciprocity. You are not too much for asking to be met. You are not broken because crumbs no longer feel like enough. You are simply waking up to the difference between being tolerated and being truly held. And once you see that difference, you cannot unsee it. Let that be the beginning of your honesty. Let that be the end of your apology. My kindness no longer requires self-betrayal. And if tonight all you can do is whisper that sentence to yourself in the dark, that is enough for now. Because the woman who stops apologizing for her needs does not lose love. She loses the habit of abandoning herself to keep it.